The glittering crystal chandeliers cast a magical glow over the masquerade ball as Oliver York adjusted his ornate Venetian mask, feeling both ridiculous and strangely liberated. For the first time in years, he could walk among people without being recognized as the 32-year-old tech mogul whose face graced the cover of Forbes last month. Tonight, he was simply a man in a black tuxedo with a silver and onyx mask obscuring half his face, anonymous, ordinary, free. "Another glass of champagne, sir?" A waiter appeared with a silver tray. Oliver shook his head. "No, thank you." He needed a clear head to maintain his disguise. The annual Harrington Charity Gala was the social event of the season, and under normal circumstances, he would have been announced upon arrival, photographed extensively, and surrounded by people eager to discuss business opportunities or make investment pitches. Instead, he had slipped in through a side entrance with a borrowed invitation, determined to experience one night without the burden of his billions. He scanned the room, observing the swirl of colorful gowns and tailored suits. Everyone moved with practiced elegance, their identities concealed behind elaborate masks while they laughed, danced, and pretended not to recognize each other, though most knew exactly who was who beneath the thin veneer of mystery. That's when he saw her. She stood near one of the tall windows, slightly apart from the crowd. Her gown was a deep emerald that caught the light as she moved, and her mask, simpler than most, was crafted of delicate gold filigree that accentuated her warm brown eyes. Unlike many of the women who had dressed to attract attention, there was something genuinely captivating about her quiet confidence. Oliver found himself moving toward her before he'd made a conscious decision to do so. "You look like you're plotting an escape," he said, coming to stand beside her. She turned, those remarkable eyes widening slightly behind her mask. For a moment, she studied him with such intensity that Oliver wondered if his disguise had failed. "I was considering the logistics," she replied with a small smile. "The windows are too high and I'm wearing heels." Her voice stirred something in his memory, but he couldn't place it. "I'm Winter," she said, extending her hand. "Winter Williams. Pleasure to meet you, Winter. He hesitated, nearly giving his real name out of habit. "Owen," he finished, using his middle name instead. She tilted her head slightly. "Just Owen, no last name." "Tonight, just Owen," he confirmed with a smile. "Isn't that the point of Masquerade, a little mystery?" Winter's lips curved upward. "I suppose you're right, although I've never been very good at pretending." "So what brings you here tonight?" Oliver asked, genuinely curious. She didn't seem like the typical socialite who frequented these events. "I'm here representing the Foster Futures Foundation. We're one of the beneficiaries of tonight's fundraiser," she explained. "I run their educational outreach program." Oliver felt a flicker of recognition. His company had recently approved a substantial donation to Foster Futures, though he hadn't been personally involved in the selection process. "That's admirable work," he said sincerely. Winter shrugged. "It's necessary work. These children deserve the same opportunities as anyone else." There was passion in her voice that resonated with him. "What about you? What brings a man who introduces himself only as Owen to a charity ball? Would you believe me if I said I came for the canapés?" He joked, deflecting the question. Winter laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "They are quite good, though hardly worth the $5,000 ticket price. What if I told you I'm actually a master thief casing the room for valuables?" he suggested with mock seriousness. "I'd say you're doing a poor job of it by drawing attention to yourself by talking to me," she countered. "Perhaps you're part of my elaborate distraction." The orchestra began a new waltz, the melody filling the ballroom. "Dance with me," Oliver said impulsively, offering his hand. Winter hesitated. "I should warn you, I'm not particularly graceful. I'll take my chances." She placed her hand in his, and he led her onto the dance floor. As they began to move in time with the music, Oliver was struck by how naturally they fell into step with one another. Despite her warning, Winter followed his lead effortlessly. "You lied about not being graceful," he accused lightly. "And I suspect you've lied about several things tonight," she replied, her gaze searching his. "Including your name." Oliver missed a step, caught off guard. "What makes you say that?" You hesitated before you said it. People don't hesitate when giving their real names. "Perceptive," he admitted. "It's part of my job," Winter said. "Working with foster kids, you develop a sense for when someone isn't being entirely truthful." As they continued to dance, Oliver found himself captivated by her. There was something refreshingly direct about Winter Williams' no pretense, no agenda, just authentic conversation. It had been so long since he'd experienced that. "So, Owen, if we're sticking with that, what do you do when you're not attending masquerade balls under mysterious circumstances?" Oliver considered his response carefully. "I solve problems." "That's vague." "I find solutions to make things work better," he elaborated slightly. "Systems, organizations, technology." "A consultant then," she guessed. Something like that. It wasn't entirely untrue. His company, Paragon Technologies, specialized in innovative solutions across multiple industries. The difference was that he owned the company rather than working for it. The waltz ended and they joined the polite applause for the orchestra. Oliver was reluctant to let go of her hand. "Would you like to get some air?" he suggested, gesturing toward the terrace doors. Winter nodded. "That sounds perfect." The autumn air was cool and crisp as they stepped outside. The terrace overlooked meticulously landscaped gardens illuminated by discreetly placed lights that created a soft, ethereal glow. The sounds of the ball faded to a distant murmur. "It's beautiful out here," Winter commented, gazing up at the clear night sky where a few stars were visible despite the city lights. "Yes, it is," Oliver agreed, though he was looking at her rather than the view. Winter turned and caught him staring. A slight blush colored her cheeks above her mask. "You know, it's strange," she said, leaning against the stone balustrade. "I feel like I've met you before." Oliver tensed slightly. "I have one of those faces, I suppose." Even with half of it covered, she shook her head. "It's not your face. It's something else, the way you speak, perhaps, or move." She studied him thoughtfully. "You remind me of someone I encountered briefly once." "Oh," he kept his tone casual despite his growing concern. "Who would that be?" "Oliver York," she said quietly. His heart skipped a beat. "The tech billionaire? I'm flattered by the comparison, but I assure you, my bank account has considerably fewer zeros." Winter smiled, but there was something knowing in her expression that unsettled him. "I volunteered at a STEM program for foster youth last year," she explained. York was there as a guest speaker. He spent about 15 minutes with my group of high school students. Oliver remembered the event. He'd participated in several similar programs over the past few years, part of his company's educational outreach initiative. "I'm sure he meets thousands of people. I doubt he'd remember me," Winter continued. "But there was something about the way he listened to those kids. Most successful people like him, they hear but don't listen. They're already formulating their response, their next move. He was different." Oliver felt a strange tightness in his chest. He remembered that day clearly now, the bright classroom, the eager students. And yes, he recalled a young woman with intelligent eyes who had asked thoughtful questions about technology accessibility for underserved communities. "Could that have been Winter? You have the same quality," she said, turning to face him fully. "You listen like he did." "Perhaps we both just have good manners," Oliver deflected, though he was touched by her observation. Winter laughed. "Perhaps. Though good manners are increasingly rare these days." A comfortable silence fell between them as they stood side by side, looking out over the gardens. Oliver couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so at ease with someone. "What made you decide to work with foster children?" he asked after a moment. Winter's expression grew more serious. "I was in the system myself, from ages 9 to 18. "I'm sorry," he said, meaning it. She shook her head. "Don't be. I was luckier than most. I had a few good placements, dedicated social workers and teachers who cared. Not everyone gets that. I wanted to be part of making the system better for those who come after me." Her candor moved him. While Oliver had grown up with privilege, losing both his parents in a car accident when he was 22 had left him with a profound understanding of what it meant to face the world alone. His inheritance had cushioned the practical aspects, but the emotional impact had shaped much of who he became. "That's admirable," he said quietly, "using your personal experience to create positive change." "What about you?" Winter asked. "What drives you?" The question caught him off guard. Most people asked about his success, his company, his wealth, not what drove him. "I believe in potential," he said after a thoughtful pause. "In looking at something and seeing not just what it is, but what it could be with the right resources and support." He smiled slightly. "That probably sounds like consultant speak." "No," Winter replied, her eyes warm behind her mask. "It sounds genuine." The orchestra inside began playing a livelier tune, the music drifting out to the terrace. "Should we go back in?" Oliver suggested, though he was reluctant to rejoin the crowd. "Actually, I should probably be making the rounds," Winter said with regret in her voice. "Networking is part of why I'm here tonight." "Of course," he nodded, hiding his disappointment. "I've monopolized enough of your time." "I wouldn't call it monopolizing," she said with a smile. "More like a welcome respite from the usual small talk." As they walked back toward the ballroom doors, Oliver made an impulsive decision. "Winter," he said, touching her arm gently to stop her. "Would you have dinner with me sometime?" Without the masks, she looked up at him, hesitating. "I don't even know your real name." "What if I promised to tell you over dinner?" Winter studied his face for a long moment. "All right, mystery man, dinner it is." They exchanged phone numbers, Oliver using his personal line rather than his business one. As she walked away to join a group of donors, he felt an unfamiliar lightness. For the first time in years, someone was interested in him, not his fortune or his influence. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Oliver maintained his anonymity, making polite conversation with various guests, but finding that no one else captured his attention the way Winter had. Around midnight, he slipped out as quietly as he had arrived, his thoughts filled with emerald green and knowing brown eyes. The following morning, Oliver sat in his penthouse office overlooking the city skyline, unable to focus on the quarterly reports his assistant had prepared. His mind kept drifting to Winter Williams and their encounter at the Masquerade. "Sir, the marketing team is waiting in the conference room," his assistant, Rachel, reminded him from the doorway. "Reschedule, please," Oliver decided abruptly. Rachel looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, and the call with Tokyo, push it to tomorrow." He stood up, reaching for his jacket. "I'm going out for a few hours. Personal business." "Yes, Mr. York." Once alone in his private elevator, Oliver took out his phone. He hesitated only briefly before sending a text to Winter. "Dinner tonight, I know a place with excellent canapés." Her response came a few minutes later as he was getting into his car. "I'm intrigued, but I still don't know your name." "All will be revealed over appetizers," he replied. 7 p.m., make it 7:30. I have a meeting that might run late." Oliver smiled. 7:30 it is, I'll send a car for you." "No need, just text me the address." Her independence was refreshing. Most women he dated were all too happy to be chauffeured in his luxury vehicles. "As you wish. See you tonight." Throughout the day, Oliver found himself thinking about how Winter would react when she learned his identity. Would she be impressed? Intimidated? Angry that he'd deceived her? He genuinely couldn't predict her response, which was both unsettling and exciting. That evening, he arrived at Lumiere, an intimate French restaurant known for its excellent cuisine and discreet service, 30 minutes early. He'd reserved a private corner table and instructed the staff that he wanted no special treatment, a directive that had clearly confused the maitre d', who was accustomed to making a fuss over him. At exactly 7:35, Winter arrived. She wore a simple navy blue dress that accentuated her slender figure, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. Without her mask, he could fully appreciate her features, warm brown eyes framed by dark lashes, high cheekbones. and a mouth that curved naturally upward as if she was perpetually on the verge of a smile. Oliver stood as she approached, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't felt since his first major investor pitch a decade ago. "You're punctual," he said, immediately regretting the banal observation. Winter's eyebrows rose slightly. "Were you expecting me to be fashionably late?" "No, he shook his head, smiling. "Let me start over. You look beautiful and I'm glad you came." Her expression softened. "Thank you, this place is lovely." As they sat down, Winter looked at him expectantly. "So now that the masks are off, literally and figuratively, who am I having dinner with?" Oliver took a deep breath. "Oliver York." Winter's expression didn't change for a moment, then she nodded slowly. "I thought so. You don't seem surprised." "I told you last night that you reminded me of him." She corrected herself. "I wasn't entirely sure, but I had a feeling." "Why didn't you say anything?" She shrugged. "I figured you had your reasons for the disguise." "And honestly, I was enjoying talking to someone who seemed genuinely interested in my work rather than just making small talk to be polite." The waiter arrived with water and menus, giving Oliver a moment to process her response. She wasn't upset or star-struck, just matter of fact. After they ordered, Oliver leaned forward slightly. "I'm curious what gave me away." Winter considered the question. "It was a combination of things. Your posture, the way you speak articulate but not pretentious. And when you talked about seeing potential in things, it matched what I remembered from your speech to those students." "I'm impressed by your observation skills," Oliver said honestly. "Like I said, it's part of my job." She took a sip of water. "So why the disguise, trying to avoid the press?" "Partly," he admitted. "But mostly I wanted one evening where people were responding to me as a person, not as Oliver York, billionaire CEO." "That must be difficult," Winter said thoughtfully, "never knowing if people are interested in you or what you can do for them." "It can be," he acknowledged, surprised by her empathy. "Most people had little sympathy for the challenges that came with wealth and success. I don't mean to sound ungrateful for my position. I'm very fortunate in countless ways." "Acknowledging challenges doesn't negate gratitude," Winter pointed out. "Both can exist simultaneously." The appetizers arrived, a delicate arrangement of seared scallops for Winter and foie gras for Oliver. "So," Winter said after taking a bite, "now that I know who you are, what happens next?" "Was this dinner just to satisfy your curiosity about whether I'd recognize you?" "No," Oliver replied immediately. "I wanted to see you again because I enjoyed talking with you. The fact that you might have recognized me added some complexity, but it wasn't my primary motivation." "Complexity," she repeated with a small smile. "That's one way to put it." "Does knowing who I am change things for you?" he asked, realizing he was holding his breath waiting for her answer. Winter considered the question carefully, her fork poised midair. "It would be dishonest to say it doesn't change anything. Of course it does, but not in the way you might think." "How, then?" "It creates a power imbalance," she said simply. "You're one of the wealthiest men in the country. I run an educational program on a nonprofit budget." "That's a reality we can't ignore." Oliver appreciated her frankness. "I understand that, but I'd like to think we could find a way past it." "Maybe," she conceded, "if we're both honest going forward." "I can promise that," Oliver said sincerely. Their conversation flowed easily through the main course, Oliver learning about Winter's journey through the foster care system, her scholarship to Columbia, and her passionate commitment to education reform. In turn, he shared stories about building his company from a dorm room project to a global technology leader, his struggle to maintain his privacy as his profile rose, and his more recent focus on philanthropy. "My parents died when I was 22, he told her over dessert, a confession he rarely shared. "I had just graduated college. Suddenly, I was alone with more money than I knew what to do with and a family legacy to uphold." Winter's expression was compassionate. "That's a heavy burden for anyone, especially someone so young." "It shaped everything that came after," Oliver admitted. I threw myself into expanding the company because it was what my father would have wanted, but lately I've been questioning whether it's what I want. And what do you want, Oliver York? Winter asked softly. He looked at her, struck by how easy it was to talk to her, how her presence made him feel both challenged and accepted. I'm still figuring that out, he said honestly, but I think it has something to do with making a more direct impact. Seeing results firsthand rather than just reading reports about them. Winter nodded. That makes sense. It's why I chose direct service work over policy, even though policy might ultimately affect more people. I need to see the faces of those I'm helping. As their evening drew to a close, Oliver found himself reluctant to end it. Would you like to take a walk? There's a nice path along the river just a block from here. Winter glanced at her watch. I should probably head home, early meeting tomorrow. Of course, Oliver nodded, hiding his disappointment. May I at least see you to a cab outside? The autumn night was cool and clear. As they waited for the valet to hail a taxi, Oliver turned to Winter. I'd like to see you again, he said directly. Would that be possible? Winter looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. I'd like that too, but I think we should be clear about something. What's that? I won't be impressed by expensive restaurants or extravagant gestures, she said firmly. That's not what interests me about you. Oliver felt a smile spreading across his face. What does interest you about me? The man behind the mask, Winter replied simply. The one who listens when foster kids talk about their dreams, the one who sees potential in things, that's who I'd like to get to know better. A taxi pulled up to the curb. I think that can be arranged, Oliver said, opening the door for her. Winter paused before getting in. Good night, Oliver. Thank you for dinner. Thank you for seeing me, he replied, the words holding more meaning than the simple courtesy would suggest. As the taxi pulled away, Oliver stood on the sidewalk watching until it disappeared around a corner. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with business deals or technological breakthroughs. Over the next few weeks, Oliver and Winter began seeing each other regularly. True to her word, Winter showed little interest in the trappings of his wealth. When he suggested a weekend trip to Paris on his private jet, she countered with an invitation to volunteer at a community garden project with her foster youth program. When he offered box seats at the symphony, she proposed a local jazz club where a former foster student was performing. Oliver found himself experiencing a side of life he'd been insulated from for years: community centers in underserved neighborhoods, public parks, small restaurants where the owners knew Winter by name. Far from feeling out of place, he discovered a sense of connection that had been missing from his life of exclusive access and VIP treatment. You really don't mind this? Winter asked one Saturday afternoon as they sat on a bench eating hot dogs from a street vendor, watching children play in a public splash pad. Mind what? Oliver asked, genuinely confused. She gestured around them. This, normal life. No security detail hovering nearby, no special treatment, paper napkins instead of linen. Oliver considered the question seriously. I don't just not mind it, I'm enjoying it. It's liberating to just be a person among people. Winter smiled, a trace of mustard at the corner of her mouth. Without thinking, Oliver reached out and gently wiped it away with his thumb. What? She asked, noticing his expression. I think I'm falling in love with you, he said, the words surprising himself as much as her. Winter's eyes widened. Oliver. Too soon? He asked, suddenly uncertain. She shook her head slowly. Not too soon, just unexpected for me too, he admitted. But it's true, you've changed how I see the world, how I see myself in it. Winter was quiet for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. I care about you too, she finally said, more than I expected to. But I'm also cautious. Our worlds are very different. They don't have to be separate worlds, Oliver pointed out. These past weeks have shown me that. It's not just about whether you can adapt to hot dogs in the park, Winter said gently. It's about whether we want the same things in life. What do you want? Oliver asked. Winter looked out at the playing children, her expression softening. A meaningful life. Work that matters. Eventually, a family of my own children who never have to wonder if they're loved or whether they belong. Those sound like things I want too, Oliver said quietly. She turned back to him. And what about your company, your responsibilities? Paragon will always be part of my life, he acknowledged, but it doesn't have to be my entire life. I've been thinking about restructuring, bringing in more leadership, creating a foundation to focus on educational technology for underserved communities. Winter's eyes lit up. Really, he confirmed. Meeting you has clarified some things I've been considering for a while. Winter reached for his hand, interlacing her fingers with his. I think I'm falling in love with you too, she said softly, and that terrifies me. Why? Because loving someone makes you vulnerable, she explained, and I learned early to protect myself. Oliver brought their joined hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. I would never hurt you, Winter. Not intentionally, she agreed, but life happens, people change, priorities shift. Then we face it together, Oliver said simply, day by day. As autumn turned to winter, their relationship deepened. Oliver restructured his work schedule to allow for more personal time. He established the York Foundation for Educational Innovation with Winter as a key advisor, leveraging his resources and her expertise to create programs that would genuinely impact children in the foster system. Winter gradually opened more of her life to him, introducing him to her former foster mother, an elderly woman named Ruth, who had provided the only true stability of her childhood, and to the network of friends who had become her chosen family. 4 months after their meeting at the Masquerade ball, Oliver took Winter back to the Harrington estate, which was available for private events when not hosting charity galas. He arranged for the ballroom to be set up just as it had been the night they met, complete with an orchestra playing the same waltz that had accompanied their first dance. When Winter entered in a new emerald gown, her eyes widened at the familiar setting. What's all this? She asked, turning to Oliver, who stood beside her in a tuxedo, holding 2 masks. I thought we might reenact our first meeting, he explained, offering her the gold filigree mask that matched the one she'd worn that night. Only this time, no secrets between us. Winter took the mask with a smile. You're quite the romantic, Oliver York. Only with you, he replied honestly. They danced beneath the crystal chandeliers, the ballroom empty except for them and the orchestra. Do you remember what you said to me that night? Oliver asked as they moved across the floor. I said many things, Winter laughed. Most of them probably embarrassing in retrospect. You said you weren't very good at pretending, he reminded her. And that was what drew me to you, your authenticity in a room full of people playing roles. Winter's expression softened. And you listened in a way that made me feel heard. As the waltz ended, Oliver guided Winter to the terrace where they had continued their conversation that fateful evening. Unlike that night, the garden was now transformed with thousands of tiny lights that created a magical glow among the winter foliage. Oliver, this is beautiful, Winter breathed, taking in the scene. He turned to face her, removing his mask and then gently taking hers as well. Winter Williams, he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. You recognized me when I was hiding behind a mask. You saw the man, not the billionaire. You challenged me to live a more authentic life, to use my resources for direct impact rather than abstract benefit. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Winter's hands flew to her mouth as he knelt before her. I love you, Oliver continued, opening the box to reveal a ring with a simple emerald surrounded by small diamonds. I want to build a life with you, a real life filled with hot dogs in the park and community gardens and foster children who need homes. Will you marry me? Tears glistened in Winter's eyes as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to embrace her, Oliver was struck by the journey that had brought them to this moment. If he hadn't attended the masquerade in disguise that night, if Winter hadn't recognized something in him beneath the mask, they might never have found each other. What are you thinking? Winter asked, noticing his expression. "I'm thinking about how a single decision can change everything," he replied, holding her close. "And how grateful I am that you saw past the mask to my heart." Winter smiled up at him. "Some disguises can hide a face," she said softly, "but none can hide a heart from someone who knows how to look." Under the starlit sky, their lips met in a kiss that sealed their future, a future built not on wealth or status, but on recognition of what truly mattered, being seen and loved for exactly who they were. 1 year later, Oliver and Winter York celebrated their first anniversary by establishing the Maskless Foundation, dedicated to supporting foster youth in discovering their authentic identities and potential. Together, they created programs that combined Oliver's business acumen with Winter's first-hand understanding of the foster system, helping thousands of children find their paths. Their personal life flourished alongside their professional collaboration. They divided their time between Oliver's penthouse, which they renovated to be more welcoming and less austere, and a modest home near the community centers where they both volunteered regularly. They welcomed a foster daughter of their own, a 12-year-old named Lily who shared Winter's love of reading and Oliver's curiosity about technology. As Oliver watched his wife helping Lily with homework at their kitchen table, he reflected on how completely his life had transformed since that masquerade ball. His company continued to thrive, but it no longer defined him. His wealth remained a resource, but not his identity. What defined him now was the family he was building, the communities he was serving, and the love of a woman who had seen past his disguise to the heart beneath the heart that had always longed to be recognized for itself alone.